Welcome back to Nevermore Hollows. As you know, I am Lafayette Faust, shining a light on the darkness that infects this creepy little town. Tonight, we return to Winona's Waffle Hut, where I will tell you the strange story of Clint Frye, a fearful young man who stares down the rotten gullet of death 3 separate times to learn what I believe is the ultimate lesson. With that, I ask you to sit back, turn on a light, and prepare yourself. The crescent moon hung above the diner like a schizophrenic sneer. The night was hot and sticky, and the black pavement was awash in the sickly yellow glow of the parking lot lights. Billy Watson was the only patron, and Winona Crow, the owner of Winona's Waffle Hut, was wiping down the bar, hoping for a quiet night when Clint Frye walked in and sat at a stool. "Evening, Clint," she said. Clint was a thin and squirrely man of 25. He snatched a menu, shot a couple suspicious looks around the diner, and said, "It's safe here tonight, Winona?" Nevermore Hollows was a nexus for the paranormal and the strange, which often ended in violence and death. Because of this, Winona kept a shotgun under the counter, and Isaac White, her assistant manager, carried a concealed 9mm. "Safer than most places in this crazy town," she said. "Why do you ask?" Clint seemed surprised he was playing with the menu. He dropped it on the counter, twitched his shoulders, and glanced again at the door. "I ain't sure, but I got this weird feeling." "I see," Winona said. Clint's story was a sad one. When he was 10 years old, his dad died of a heart attack while beating him with a leather strap. When he was 11, he witnessed the murder of his foster family. Though he was by nature a fearful man, she still looked up through the windows and into the parking lot. Just in case. "What can I do?" "Well, it's like this," Clint said. "I done believe you and Mr. Isaac know that they's something not quite right about this town." Winona had seen the malignant darkness of the town and nodded. "We have open minds." Clint shot a look to his left and scrutinized Billy Watson, as if he wasn't sure that Billy really was Billy. He twitched his head around to look into the dimly lit parking lot. "Well, earlier this evening, I began to feel like something ain't right, like something is off." "What do you mean?" Winona said. "I feel like something bad is about to happen." Winona was a sturdy woman of 40. She was polite, fair, but took zero crap from anybody. Over the years, the diner had been attacked by witches, monsters, psychopaths, and even one deranged monkey who shot up the place, killing a local author. She took all threats seriously, no matter how vague, so she took a step to her left toward the shotgun she kept under the counter. Other than herself and Clint and Billy, the only people in the diner were Isaac and Mark, the fry cook. "Why don't you tell me more while I have Mark fry you up a burger?" she said. She gave Mark the order and motioned for Isaac to come closer. Suddenly, the swinging door to the kitchen slammed open, and an old man wearing a rumpled blue suit ran out, his withered face twisted into a mask of rage. In his right hand he held a hammer. He raised it high and ran straight at Clint. For 2 heartbeats, everyone stood in confusion. Then Isaac rushed toward Clint, intending to push him out of the way. Winona couldn't use the shotgun because Billy was in the line of fire. She jumped the counter and snatched at the old man, but he was surprisingly fast. Clint stood from the stool and turned to run. The old man let out a grunting scream and swung the hammer down onto the back of Clint's skull with a sickening crack. Clint dropped to his knees, his mouth working but nothing coming out. The man brought the hammer down again, smacking it against Clint's right ear. Clint dropped with a wet thud onto the floor. The old man lost the grip of the hammer because it was buried in Clint's skull. Winona slammed into the man. They slid across the floor in a heap. She was surprised that he was so strong considering he felt like skin and bones under the rumpled suit. Isaac reached Clint, dropped to his knees, yelled at Mark to call 911, but it was too late. Clint was dead. Isaac shot up and ran over to help Winona. They wrestled the guy over and noticed that his eyes were withered orbs and his grin was full of yellow teeth. Isaac's heart skipped a cold beat when he realized that they were fighting with a corpse. Its dried skin stretched taut against his skull. It struggled to crawl toward Clint and said in a graveyard growl,
"Let me see his brains."
Isaac was a 30-year-old black man. He was thick like a linebacker, soft-spoken like a poet. He had seen evil in many forms during the past couple years working the graveyard shift, so he understood that this corpse was possessed by something ancient and malevolent. "That ain't gonna happen," he said. The corpse turned its shriveled eyes to Winona and said,
"This was fun."
Then the body convulsed and went limp. Sheriff Mosley strode into the diner, flanked by 2 deputies with guns drawn. He walked over to Winona and Isaac, who knelt beside the corpse. "That's Robert Vaughn. I spoke at his funeral last year. He was buried in the family mausoleum in the cemetery right down the road." "I thought he looked familiar," Winona said. She pushed herself up and turned to Mark. "How the hell did he get in the kitchen?" Mark rubbed a hand nervously across the back of his neck. "I stepped out for a smoke because it was slow. I didn't lock the door when I came back inside." "I already called Alyssa," Mosley said. "I figured if something was going down here, we'd need her." Alyssa Hart, the town's coroner, walked through the door. She wore a vintage Hong Kong Phooey t-shirt and Doc Martens. She was also aware of Nevermore's troubles with evil. She looked down at Vaughn's corpse. "I know the food is good here, Winona, but I don't think it's come back from the dead good." Isaac smiled. Mosley smirked. Winona said, "Smart ass." Alyssa looked down at Clint's body, the gore spreading around his head like a blood-smeared halo. "Damn," she said. "He was a sweet guy." Statements were taken and the scene was processed. The bodies were hauled away in the back of Alyssa's 66 VW bus, which she used instead of a coroner's van. Later, when the morning shift arrived, Winona and Isaac went home to get some sleep. They returned at 9 p.m., and by 11 the diner was again empty of patrons, which was normal for a Monday night. She and Isaac and Mark sat at the counter talking and drinking coffee. The bell above the door rang, and they were stunned when Clint walked into the diner. He looked healthy. The gaping wounds in his skull were gone. He took a seat beside Isaac and began nervously playing with the salt shaker. Mark grew up in New York, but his years in the South had not softened his directness. "What the hell, Clint?" Clint's eyes twitched around the room. "I don't know, man. All I remember is that old dude coming at me with a hammer. Next thing I know, I woke up in one of them damn dead body coolers at the morgue." Winona could see no evidence that his head had been bashed open. "When did that happen?" "Me waking up at the morgue? About an hour ago. I was laying inside that cooler naked as a baby. I finally found the door latch and let myself out. Did you know them dead body coolers have handles on the inside? I mean, what the hell kind of world we living in? Anyway, I finally found my clothes and put them on, and then I came here." Winona looked at the bloodstains on his shirt. "Why did you come here?" Clint put the salt shaker down, picked up a bottle of hot sauce, and began twirling it in his hands. "Hell if I know. I just felt this big urge to come here, so here I am." "So you don't know how you ended up in the morgue?" Mark asked. Clint placed the hot sauce back on the counter and picked up a menu. "Nope. Maybe you can tell me, 'cause I got this feeling like it was real weird." "Oh, it was," Winona said. Clint squinted at her. "Well, why don't y'all just go ahead and tell me?" "I'll tell him. Isaac said. Clint, you were murdered last night. Albert Vaughn smashed open your skull with a hammer. Clint's mouth fell open. Ain't Mr. Vaughn dead? Yes, Isaac said, but somehow he came back and murdered you. After a long moment, Clint said, Huh. I know this all sounds insane, Winona said, but supernatural things happen in this town. In fact, I've come to believe that Nevermore Hollows is evil's playground. Clint began to slowly nod. Okay. You just done told me I got my brains bashed out by a zombie. I need a minute. I believe I'm going to go splash some water on my face, clear my mind, think all this through. Clint stood off the stool and went into the men's restroom. Poor bastard, Mark said. Winona shot him a disapproving look. We've experienced a lot of crazy in this diner, she said, and way too much death. But we've never had one come back like this. I wish I could say I was happy, but I've got a bad feeling. Isaac stared down at his coffee. After a moment he said, There's clearly a reason why he was brought back. Yeah, but why? Winona said. Isaac looked up. You said it already. Supernatural things happen here, both good and evil, and it seems like they're at war. Isaac and Winona had spent many hours in deep discussion about this topic. They both believed in a spiritual realm that was in constant battle for human souls. She understood that he was explaining this for Mark. Go on, she said. Isaac looked at Mark. What if there's something important that Clint needs to accomplish, but the evil in this town wants to stop him? Mark scratched his chin. I don't know about this hoodoo and voodoo bullcrap, but let's say I'm willing to buy into it. Why Clint, and why bring him back here? Before Isaac could answer, the door to the men's restroom opened, and a hulk of a man wearing overalls with no shirt walked out. He was cue-ball bald, and his left eye was so lazy it seemed to be lackadaisically rolling around loose in the socket. He walked by them, glancing at them with his right eye, while his left eye wandered about in other directions. They noticed fresh claw marks on his face, as if he had been in a life-or-death struggle. Where the hell did he come from? Winona said. She motioned for Mark to hand her the shotgun. Isaac shot up and ran to the men's restroom and pushed through the door. He turned back and said, Call Sheriff Mosley. Clint's dead. Again. Winona snatched up the shotgun and turned just as she heard the bell above the door ring. She ran to the door and looked into the parking lot. The overall-wearing Hulk was gone. She locked the door and ran back to the restroom. Clint was sprawled on the floor under a urinal, a clear plastic bag over his head. Well, I don't think we're doing a good job keeping him alive, Mark said. Winona was pissed. She put her hands on her hips and said, Damn it. I didn't see that guy at all tonight, Mark said. No way I'd have missed a freak that massive. I'll check the security cameras. Don't waste your time, Winona said, glancing down at Clint. Behind the clear plastic, his eyes bulged out of their sockets and his tongue lolled out. You won't find him. Mark stood silent for a moment, working it out in his head. You saying he just materialized inside the restroom here and killed Clint? This is some more of that good versus evil paranormal stuff you two were talking about? Winona nodded as she dialed Sheriff Mosley's number. How can you not believe in the supernatural after all you've seen during these past 2 nights? She asked. Let's say I believe that monster of a man somehow teleported into the bathroom, Mark said. Why not just teleport out when he was done murdering Clint? Why did he walk past us? Because evil has an ego, Isaac said. It wanted us to know what it had just done. 20 minutes later, Mosley and Alyssa pulled into the parking lot. Mosley in his cruiser, Alyssa in her powder blue VW bus. Winona let them in and said, "Just you two?" Mosley nodded. "I figured we need to keep it quiet." Isaac propped open the restroom door. Alyssa stepped in and examined the body. "I didn't perform an autopsy on him last night, considering it was clear how he died. I put him in one of the coolers until his funeral. I had no idea he was gone." Mark was still trying to process all he'd seen and heard. "You're acting as if him walking in here alive and well after having his brains knocked out last night doesn't shock you." Alyssa's hazel eyes sparkled. "This isn't the first time a body has gotten up and walked out of my morgue." Mark's eyes shot wide. "What?" Alyssa nodded. "Yep. I can't help but marvel at it all. It's never boring around here." She stood and turned to Isaac. "I'll pull around back and we can take him out there. I'd appreciate it if you'd help me get him on the gurney and out in my bus." They were able to get Clint out of the back before anyone saw. In fact, they did not have another customer until nearly 3 a.m., for which Winona was grateful. She did not tell the morning staff what had happened and asked Mark to keep it to himself. He said that he would, and they left to get some sleep before coming back at 9 to work yet another overnight shift. The Tuesday night graveyard shifts were the slowest of the week. It was nearing midnight, and Winona and Isaac and Mark sat at the counter drinking coffee and wondering if Clint would stay dead. The doorbell jangled, and they were not surprised to see Clint standing in his rumpled, blood-stained clothes. Assuming that there would be another attack, she held out her hand and Mark took the shotgun from under the counter and handed it to her. She sat it on the counter, the barrel facing the door, and motioned Clint over. He walked over to the counter and sat down. Winona put a comforting hand on his shoulder. "Same thing as last night?" Clint nodded. "Yeah, but this time that nice corner lady done kept my clothes on me and put me on the autopsy table instead of inside one of them dead body coolers." Winona smiled at how Clint kept calling the mortuary refrigerators dead body coolers. "Last night you felt compelled to come here. That the same tonight?" Clint seemed different. Winona realized he wasn't fidgety. He was more in control. "Yeah. You know, I really do like you and Isaac, and I do love y'all's hash browns, but I gotta be honest, Miss Winona, I sure didn't want to come back here tonight." Winona kept her hand on his shoulder. "I understand, son. We've been talking, and we think there's a reason why you keep coming back, like maybe there's something good you need to accomplish. Do you have any idea what that might be?" Clint shook his head. "No offense, but if there's something I'm supposed to do, why the hell do I keep getting killed?" "The evil in this town is trying its damnedest to stop you," Isaac said. Clint considered this for a moment. Then he nodded. "Yeah, that doesn't make sense, but man, I'm just a nobody. Why am I the one in the middle of all this mess?" "I can't answer that," Isaac said. "But whatever it is, it must be extremely important." They sat in silence for a few minutes. The bell above the door jangled, and they turned to see an emaciated woman creep into the diner. She was cadaver pale, with black, greasy hair falling down over her face. She wore a tattered T-shirt and was holding a wooden stake with a sharp point in her right hand. "Aw, man," Clint said. He slid off the stool and faced her. The woman lifted her hand and pointed her filthy finger at him. She smiled, showing rotten stubs, and then croaked,
"This time you stay dead."
3 things happened all at once. Isaac pulled the 9mm and aimed at the woman. Mark reached out to grab Clint and pull him toward the kitchen. Winona reached for the shotgun, but before she could grasp it, the shotgun fired all by itself, tearing a ragged hole in Clint's back. The force of the blast sent him stumbling toward the greasy woman. She stepped forward and shoved the stake through Clint's heart. The woman cackled as Clint stumbled back. He turned toward the counter, face contorted into pain and frustration. He looked at Winona and said, "Shit." He dropped to the floor, a pool of blood spreading out around him. Winona snatched a shotgun and let loose a blast. The woman exploded in a black cloud that hovered for a heartbeat, then swirled into a spiral and up into the air vent. Winona stood her ground, the shotgun pointed up at the vent in case she decided to come back. Isaac grabbed his phone and called Mosley. "I don't think I can take any more of this," Mark said. "Consider this my last shift." Winona decided that the woman wasn't coming back. She lowered the shotgun and looked at Mark. She understood that not everyone could handle the truth of a supernatural realm. "For what it's worth, I feel that we're about done with all this." Isaac stood, looking out the window into the parking lot. "Why do you say that?" Winona shrugged. "A gut feeling. This feels like the big showdown." Isaac nodded. He felt it too. He glanced around the diner, looking for any sign of danger. "So I wonder what's next." Before she could respond, Clint groaned. Isaac helped him into a sitting position. "Easy," Isaac said. "Don't try to get up." Winona looked at Clint's back and noticed the ragged shotgun wound was healed. Clint grabbed at the stake stuck in his chest. He looked up at Isaac. "Help me pull it out." Isaac shook his head. "I don't think that's a good idea." Clint grabbed a handful of Isaac's t-shirt. "Damn it, man! Go on and do it! Do it now! Hurry!" Isaac grabbed the stake and said, "Okay, be still." Clint braced himself and groaned as Isaac pulled it free. Isaac wasn't shocked to see that the wound immediately closed up. Clint pulled himself up and said, "Give it to me, and I need a flashlight, now." Winona grabbed the flashlight from under the counter. Clint snatched it and the stake from Isaac and ran out of the diner. Winona and Isaac ran after him. Clint ran halfway into the parking lot and stopped. He looked around as if trying to get his bearings. "What is it, Clint?" Isaac said. "What are you looking for? We can help." "Shh," he said. Then he ran around the side of the diner, headed toward the back. Winona and Isaac ran after him. The back of the diner sat 30 yards from the tree line of Dunwich Forest. A single security light cast a pale glow over the back door. Beyond, the forest was as dark as the grave. But they heard a girl's voice. She sounded young, and she was crying and begging for help. Clint tore off into the dark toward the girl, Winona and Isaac hot on his heels. Clint flicked on the light, and they could see a man dressed in a black suit, white shirt, black tie, and black gloves. He was bald, and thick, vertical scars were carved from the crown of his head to his neck, as if purposefully done to make his face look like a flesh-covered jack-o'-lantern. He was dragging a girl who could be no older than 10 toward the woods. When she saw the light, her screaming intensified. The man smiled, revealing teeth that had been filed into sharp triangles. "If he gets her to the woods, they're going to disappear," Clint said, running, gaining ground. Dozens of people had gone missing in Dunwich Forest over the years. It was rumored that more than one cult chose the forest to act out their arcane rituals. Knowing this, Isaac and Winona understood what Clint meant. The forest was one of the strongholds for evil, and if the man in the dark suit and grisly jack-o'-lantern face got the girl inside the woods, they would never be able to save her. "Stop!" Clint yelled. The man glanced back over his shoulder but continued dragging the poor girl closer to the trees. Clint pushed himself to run faster. The man lurched forward only 3 yards to the tree line. He yanked the little girl's arm hard, making her squeal. She had a moment of clarity, turned, and bit down on his wrist. The man smacked the girl with a black-gloved hand. But in doing so, he tripped and stumbled to his knees. He pulled the girl close and began crawling on his knees, keeping one hand on the girl's arm. This pause was all that Clint needed. He let out a righteous yell and leaped into the air, stake held high, and brought it down with all his weight into the man's back, just as he pulled the girl beyond the first tree. The stake plunged deep. The man let out a blood-chilling growl and gave one last yank on the girl's arm. Clint grabbed her and held her tight, trying to break her free from the man's grasp. He brought the butt of the flashlight down against the man's head once, twice, 3 times. And with a final growl and a snap of his sharp teeth, he let go and crawled back into the black forest. Winona ran up with her shotgun held to her shoulder and fired 2 rounds into the spot where the man had crawled. Isaac followed suit with 3 rapid shots from the pistol. Clint held the girl close, shushing her as she cried, telling her everything would be okay. She was safe now. Isaac took his flashlight and shined it into the forest, looking for the man. There was no trace. Clint carried the girl back into the diner. They all sat at a table, comforting the girl, listening to her story. Her name was Denise, and she was 9. She and her mom had been traveling the back roads through Nevermore Hollows when they got a flat just down the road. As her mom, Sarah, changed the tire, the creepy pumpkin-faced man walked out of the woods, choked her mom, then brought Denise to the woods behind Winona's. Isaac called Mosley and relayed the information. 30 minutes later, he arrived at the diner with Sarah. She was pale and had deep black bruises in the shape of fingers around her throat. She ran to Denise and wrapped her into her arms. Mosley pulled Isaac and Winona aside. "You say this guy's face had been carved up and sewn back together?" "Yes," Isaac said. "And I think the scars were caused on purpose." "What makes you think that?" "Because they were done in a way that made his head look like a jack-o'-lantern." Mosley pushed his Stetson back as he considered this information. That had to be terrifying for that poor girl. "After I get them to the hospital and make sure they're okay, I'm coming back and we're going to talk about this jack-o'-lantern freak." He escorted Sarah and Denise to his car and drove out of the parking lot. Isaac and Winona walked back over to the counter and they each took a seat on opposite sides of Clint. He sat with his hands clasped deep in thought. He did not fidget with the items from the counter, nor did he glance nervously around. "Y'all see his face?" Clint said. "Why would anybody done go and carve up his own face like that and file his teeth into points?" Winona recalled how her heart had jumped when Clint had shone the light on the man. "Horrifying," she said. "But we noticed something about you tonight, Clint." Clint looked up at Winona. "Yeah? What?" "You weren't scared. You ran toward danger without hesitation," Winona said. Isaac put a hand on Clint's shoulder and gave him an affirming squeeze. "And you saved that little girl from something unspeakable." Clint sat in silence for a moment. "Well, I guess when you done get killed 3 times and come back, it makes you not so afraid of anything anymore." Winona and Isaac exchanged a glance. Clearly, Clint was a new person. Winona gave a soft smile. "I suppose that makes sense." "But I ain't understanding why all this happened to me. I mean, I ain't no hero. I never wanted to be. Didn't have it in me. I done lived my whole life afraid." "Your humility is probably why you were chosen to save her," Winona said. "And because of how deeply you understand fear, you had a connection with that girl that Winona and I would never have had," Isaac added. "She sensed it and responded to it. We saw how you were able to comfort her while we waited for her mom to get here." "The evil in this town threw everything it had at you these past few nights," Winona said. "As strange and trippy and scary as that sounds, I think the ultimate lesson here is that if you have a righteous destiny, nothing can stop you from fulfilling it." The bell above the door jangled, and they all turned to see a group of teenagers walk in, looking for some late-night waffles. Isaac stood and headed over to get them seated and to take their order. Winona motioned for Mark to heat up the grill. She placed a hand on Clint's arm. Are you hungry? What about some hash browns? I'll make them scattered, smothered, covered, and chunked. Clint looked at her. Along with the new confidence he possessed, there was a gleam in his eyes that she had not previously seen. Well, I might as well, he said. I mean, I done already been clubbed, smothered, stabbed, and shot. Winona reared back and gave a boisterous laugh. She stood, wiping tears from the corners of her eyes. Let's not let that get out. Unlike you, I don't think my little diner could survive all that.